Hello, 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 ladies, gentlemen, and whatever else you may be. It is your boy, Murder Mystery with Joey, and we are back at you with another one. This time we are talking about the HUMANZEE hybrid experiment. Alright, and as before, if you haven't, please hit the subscribe, hit the bell icon to be notified for when we drop new episodes. Alright, let's jump right in. Technological and scientific advances rose rapidly during the late 19th and early 20th century, prompting a worldwide interest in all the new and sometimes very strange possibilities science had to offer. HUMANZEE's man-ape hybrid soldiers presented one such possibility. This was the age of steel, the railroad, the factory system, and even eugenics, but before Europe fully moved towards extreme nationalism and surprising figures campaigned for breeding a master race, a lone Russian scientist who had successfully crossbred a variety of mammals, including zebras and donkeys, got the idea to try and breed humans with apes. But his name was not Joseph Stalin, it was Ilya Ivanov, and he was exploring the human-ape hybrid possibility long before Stalin ever succeeded in politics. Over the years, and thanks to articles published by creationist organizations, Ivanov's weird experiments were conflated with Stalin, who supposedly asked scientists to breed a race of man-ape hybrid soldiers who would be super strong and serve an enormous Soviet army. Such plans were never on Stalin's radar. Indeed, such a fighting force was never even of interest to Ivanov. All he wanted to do was prove the creation of a HUMANZEE was possible. The real story of how Ivanov managed to secure a small amount of funding from the Soviet government to conduct artificial insemination experiments on both humans and chimpanzees is far more intriguing than the rumors. Just as despicable. Joseph Stalin is an easy mark upon which to blame for a multitude of evils because, in many cases, he actually was guilty, but the suggestion that he encouraged, funded, or otherwise directed a project to create a hybrid race of human ape people who would serve as super warriors in the Soviet army is not only patently absurd, but it's also false. Certainly, the scientific advances of the 19th and early 20th century proved fertile ground for even the wildest, most unethical experiments and programs. One only has to consider the corruption of eugenics to understand that the scientifically learned and the politically and financially powerful people of the world were keen to use science to further subjugate and control populations. The creation of ape men, however, wasn't even on the Soviets' radar. It was 20th century creationists who began promoting that false theory as a means of strengthening their arguments against evolution. There was actually a wrongly cited academic journal that brought Stalin's name into the fold. Creationist publications based their claims of Stalin's culpability on a single journal article written by Russian scientist Kirill Rosyanov. Since academic journals are typically peer-reviewed, the source seemed legitimate. Till one read the original article and realized Rosyanov was writing about the earlier Russian scientist Ilya Ivanov, who had indeed conducted or attempted to conduct some experiments on artificially inseminating female chimpanzees with human sperm, as well as inseminating human women with chimpanzee sperm. Stalin's name, influence, or approval are nowhere to be found in the Ivanov case or the Rosyanov article. It's quite likely that Stalin either knew nothing about or read about it in the newspapers, just like everyone else. Ilya Ivanov was a highly respected scientist with a keen dedication to the wild and wonderful new world of scientific possibilities brought at the turn of the 20th century. Despite or perhaps because of his passion, Ivanov didn't necessarily ask if something should be done, even if it was technically possible, so he had a bit of a problem with ethics. Most of his career was spent working with livestock to improve horse breeding. However, and he became known across the world for his studies and successes with artificial insemination. Indeed, he was able to produce hybrids in livestock, including a zebra-donkey mix known as the Z-Donk. Great name. Moreover, anyone who thinks Soviet leadership convinced Ivanov to explore the possibilities of a human-ape hybrids needs to look further back in Ivanov's past, since he was talking, writing, and lecturing about a possible human-ape crossbreed as early as 1910. Then we're going to get a little bit into that as well real quick, guys. The humanzee, which is sometimes a human, man-pansy, or or humanzee, the man pansy is the best, is a hypothetical hybrid of chimpanzee and human, thus a form of human-animal hybrid. Serious attempts to create such a hybrid were made by the Soviet biologist Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov in the 1920s and possibly by researchers in China in the 1960s, though neither of them succeeded. The portmanteau for humanzee for a human-chimpanzee hybrid appears to have entered usage within the 1980s. The possibility between humans and other apes has been entertained since at least the medieval period. St. Peter Damian, 11th century, claimed to have been told of the offspring of a human woman who had mated with a non-human ape, and so did Antonio Zucchelli, an Italian Franciscan Capuchin friar who was a missionary in Africa from 1698 to 1702, and Sir Edward Coke in the Institutes of the Laws of England. Chimpanzees and humans are closely related. Genetic animal hybrids with different chromosome numbers decrease the probability of viable offspring and rarely occur in the first cross. Evolutionary biologists have found evidence that hybridization between humans and pan troglodytes resulted in some varieties of archaic humans. Chimpanzees and bonobos are separate species, but hybridization has been documented. Genetic similarity, and thus the chances of successful hybridization, is not always correlated with visual appearances. Domestication and backcrossing has been found to increase fertility in subsequent generations. All great apes have similar genetic chromosome structure. Humans have one pair fewer chromosomes than other apes, as humans have 23 chromosome pairs, while all other apes only have 24. With 8 chromosomes, 12 and 13 fused in the human genome in a large chromosome, which contains remnants of the centromere and telomeres of the ancestral 12 and 13. Chromosomes 6, 13, 19, 21, 22, and X are structurally the same in all great apes. Chromosomes 3, 11, 14, 15, 18, and 20 match among gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. Chimpanzees and humans match on 1, 2p, 2q, 5, 7 to 10, 12, 16, and Y as well. Some older references include Y as a matching among gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans, but chimpanzees, bonobos, and humans have recently been found to share a large transposition from chromosome 1 to Y, not found in other apes. There have been no scientifically verified specimens of a human-chimpanzee hybrid, but there have been substantiated reports of unsuccessful attempts to create one in the Soviet Union in the 1920s, and various unsubstantiated reports on similar attempts during the second half of the 20th century. Ilya Ivanov was the first person to attempt to create a human-chimpanzee hybrid by artificial insemination. Ivanov outlined his idea as early as 1910 in a presentation to the World Congress of Zoologists in Graz. In the 1920s, Ivanov carried out a series of experiments, culminating in inseminating 3 female chimpanzees with human sperm, but he failed to achieve a pregnancy. These initial experiments took place in French Guinea. For comparison with known common statistics, in the case of male camel-female guanaco cross, the probability that insemination would lead to pregnancy was approximately 1 in 6. In 1929, he attempted to organize a set of experiments involving non-human ape sperm in human volunteers, but was delayed by the death of his last orangutan. The next year, he fell under political criticism from the Soviet government and was sentenced to exile in the Kazakh SSR. He worked there at the Kazakh Veterinary Zootechnical Institute and died of a stroke 2 years later. In the 1970s, a performing chimpanzee named Oliver was popularized as a possible mutant or even a human-chimpanzee hybrid. Claims that Oliver had 47 chromosomes, midpoint between the normal 46 for humans and 48 for chimpanzees, was disproven after an examination of his genetic material at the University of Chicago in 1996. Oliver's cranial morphology, ear shape, freckles, and baldness fall within the range of variability exhibited by the common chimpanzee. Results of further studies with Oliver were published in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology. In the 1980s, there were reports of an experiment in human-chimpanzee crossbreeding conducted in China in 1967, and on the planned resumption of such experiments in 1981, Ji Zhongjiang, head of a hospital in Shenyang, was reported as claiming to have been part of a 1967 experiment in Shenyang in which a chimpanzee female had been impregnated with human sperm. According to this account, the experiment was cut short by the Cultural Revolution, with the responsible scientists sent off to farm labor and the 3 months pregnant chimpanzee dying from neglect. According to Timothy McNulty of the Chicago Tribune, the report was based on an article in the Wenhu Bao newspaper of Shanghai. Li Guang of the Genetics Research Bureau of the Chinese Academy of Sciences was cited as confirming both the existence of the experiment prior to the Cultural Revolution and the plans to resume testing. In 2019, unconfirmed report surfaced that a team of researchers led by Juan Carlos Espuza Belmont from the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in the U.S. successfully produced the first human-monkey chimera. And a chimera is a genetic chimerism, or chimera is a single organism composed of cells with more than one distinct genotype. Animal chimeras can be produced by the fusion of two embryos. In plants and some animal chimeras, mosaicism involves distinct types of tissue that originated from the same genotype. Belmont and others had previously produced pig and sheep embryos containing a small percentage of human cells. As with those embryos, the human-monkey chimeras were reportedly only allowed to develop for a few weeks. Although development was stopped prior to the formation of a nervous system or organs, avoiding more severe ethical concerns, the research was reportedly carried out in China to avoid legal issues. Due to the much larger evolutionary distance between humans and monkeys versus humans and chimpanzees, it is considered unlikely that true human-monkey hybrids could be brought to term. However, it's feasible that human-compatible organs for transplantation could be grown in these chimeras. We're going to dabble a bit back into the theory of Stalin actually being involved in the HUMANZEE experiment. During the years following the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, Ivanov thought the time might be right to approach the new regime for funding. This was not to develop super warriors, however, but to conduct general artificial insemination procedures similar to those he had already done, though, of course, this time would be far more controversial since humans were involved. But he didn't gain much support, and none of it came from Stalin. In 1924, the Soviet government, specifically the Soviet Financial Committee, he didn't gain much support, and that was as far as the HUMANZEE studies had went after that. We're going to talk a little bit about Jack's lore, who was the humanzee of Orange Park. Unseen and unknown by most in the region, from 1930 to 1965, Orange Park was home to one of the largest chimpanzee research operations in the world. The Yerkes Laboratories of Primate Biology, the mysterious monkey farm, has given rise to one of the First Coast's strangest legends, that a half-human, half-chimp humanzee was born within its walls. Could there be truth behind that? Located on Kingsley Avenue, 2 miles from the Orange Park riverfront, is the Rockefeller Medical and Professional Center, an unassuming office park with an extraordinary past. The campus of concrete block buildings was once home to the Yerkes Laboratories for Primate Biology. Founded by Yale primatologist Robert M. Yerkes in 1930, locals at the time viewed the laboratory with an air of mystery. Florida Times Union columnist Bill Foley wrote that it inspired dark, deep speculation, wild exaggeration, and tall tales shamelessly told around 1,000 campfires. The forgotten history is interesting enough, but the Yerkes lab has entered the realm of Northeast Florida legend due to the claim that an extremely unorthodox experiment occurred there. According to the tale, the Yerkes scientists engaged in a wildly unethical experiment that saw the birth of a living, breathing humanzee, a half-human, half-chimp hybrid. Shortly thereafter, as the story goes, they destroyed the infant and covered up what they'd done, leaving behind only a pervasive urban legend. The definitive version comes from Dr. Gordon Gallup, a respected psychology professor at the University of Albany who has an interest in hybrid creatures. For more than 20 years, he's been relating the story of how he learned of the Orange Park humanzee in documentaries and news pieces. As he said, "Well, I had a former colleague who passed away quite a while ago who happened to be at the Orange Park when the supposed experiment took place. According to the rumor, a female chimpanzee who was in heat was artificially inseminated with human DNA from an obviously undisclosed source. And 9 months later, the gestation for pregnancy in chimpanzees and humans is about the same. It gave rise to a live birth. Within a week or so after the birth of the hybrid, the decision was made to euthanize the infant because of all the profound social and psychological and religious repercussions. And it's easy to see why the story has caught on. It's both plausible and existentially terrifying. But did it happen? Could it happen? To answer some of these, let's dive into what is known for sure. Whatever the truth is of the HUMANZEE, the Yerkes laboratories were quite real. Robert Yerkes, a psychobiologist from Yale University with an interest in primate intelligence, built the facility as a place to rear and study captive chimps. He chose Orange Park as the location due to its warm climate, cheap land prices, and relatively easy transportation to New Haven by train and ship. The property comprised 182 acres, though only 10 acres were ever developed into buildings to house and study the apes. Yerkes and his staff pioneered the care and breeding of captive chimpanzees and showed that a population could be bred, kept healthy, and studied in Florida. Said Dr. Donald Dewsbury, professor emeritus of psychology at the University of Florida and author of a book on the facility Monkey Farm, a history of the Yerkes laboratories of primate biology. They believed that such research would improve our understanding of our nearest relatives and that such knowledge might be useful in improving the human condition. The facility, originally the Yale Laboratories of Primate Biology, was renamed for Yerkes after he retired in 1941. It started with 4 chimps, and by 1965 the population had grown to 67, along with 11 gorillas, 27 orangutans, and more than 100 monkeys, some 20 different species. Over the years, many renowned scientists worked at the Yerkes laboratories, including Henry Neeson, Carl Lashley, and Kenneth Spence. The research that was done there was serious and groundbreaking, says Dewberry. Some leading scientists were attracted to Orange Park. One, Roger Sperry, went on to win a Nobel Prize in medicine or physiology. The Yerkes laboratories kept its distance from the Orange Park community. In 1930, Yerkes wrote, "It is true we do not court publicity. Far too often it results in misunderstanding, unenlightened criticism, or worse, still ridicule. The facility did periodically host visitors and school trips, and staff sometimes took the apes around town. Yerkes himself could occasionally be seen driving to the post office with the favorite chimp, Judy, in the passenger seat." The Orange Park research station became obsolete when the federal government decided to fund regional primate labs, and in 1965, Yale sold it to Emory University. Emory relocated the apes and monkeys to a new facility near its Atlanta campus and shuttered the old monkey farm for good. Developer Marvin Willey purchased the property, turning the 172 wooded acres into the Foxwood residential subdivision. Unusually in demolition, happy Northeast Florida, he kept the old lab buildings for an office park. Businesses now operate where experiments once occurred. The caretaker's house is now the granary, a health food shop. The story of a supposed HUMANZEE experiment at Yerkes Laboratories has some company in the spirit of weird science. During the 1920s, like we said, Soviet biologist Ilya Ivanov conducted unsuccessful experiments attempting to create the hybrid chimp-human embryos. While news stories from the 1980s claim similar experiments occurred in China before the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s, stories such as these captured imaginations around the world, popularizing the question of whether a HUMANZEE is possible. Interest in the question spiked in the 1970s when a chimp named Oliver, like we said, drew attention due to his unusual appearance and behavior. So could half-human, half-ape beings walk the earth with us? Gallup thinks it's possible. While hybridization is fairly common among many types of animals, the best-known example is the mule, the offspring of a male donkey and a female horse with characteristics of both parents. Hybrids occur among primates as well, says Gallup. It turns out that the rhesus monkeys and baboons, which are at least as different, but maybe even more different from one another than humans and chimpanzees, will interbreed and hybridize and produce a viable offspring. They're called reboons. In 2003, a British television documentary took up the question of human-chimp hybrids to a wide audience. HUMANZEE, the human chimp, primarily focused on Oliver while touching on other anecdotes and stories, and aired on Channel 5 in the UK and later on the Discovery Channel in North America. Of special interest in the Jacksonville area, it featured Dr. Gordon Gallup recounting the story he'd heard about Yerkes Laboratories HUMANZEE for the first time in public. The documentary led to an explosion of interest in hybrid, and the term HUMANZEE Google Trends shows searches for HUMANZEE spiked starting in May 2004 after the show aired on the Discovery Channel. From there, numerous TV programs, YouTube videos, articles, and podcasts have covered the topic. Locally, the story has been explored by the Florida Times Union and by Tim Gilmore. It was at this point that the Orange Park HUMANZEE rose to the status of a true legend, along the lines of Ghostlight Road, the St. John's River Monster, and Ghost of Takaloo. It's easy to see why it caught on. First, it built on long-standing fascination with the monkey farm in Orange Park. Many long-timers can testify to how alien and intimidating the secretive facility and its scientists seemed to the small, rural town. It was a perfect setting for scary stories and legend tripping, the rite of passage in which young folks test their mettle by braving frightening locations. One informant, Kirk Luman, says he stayed in the building with a couple of friends in the early 70s. It had been abandoned for a while. It was a dare because we heard it was haunted by monkeys and mad scientists. Heard of it as a child, was born in the 1950s, was always scared we would go there and see this thing, never knew the real story or if there was one. The story's plausibility had no doubt led to some of its intrigue. It seems to fall within range of some of the scientific horrors of the period, eugenics, the Tuskegee experiments, etc., as well as some of the real research at Yerkes Laboratories that explicitly intended to divine the boundary between human and ape. Regardless of the truth of the story, the HUMANZEE of Orange Park has become an indelible part of First Coast folklore, and it shows no sign of going away. There's a certain color, says Dewsbury. I could see why people would love the story. I'd be fascinated if it proved to be well documented. What a great story. I can see why people find it so intriguing and fascinating. It's not a matter of faith. It has the potential, whether or not it ever happens, to become a matter of fact. I'm just wondering, listener, if you're out there and you've ever heard of the HUMANZEE, do you believe that they exist, or do you believe that there may be some claim to the human ape-like hybrids in the stories that we've heard of them terrorizing other humans and national park goers? Is there truth behind the HUMANZEE hybrid? Will we ever get any evidence that supports it? I think sooner or later, we might find out. But until then, it has been your boy, Murder Mystery with Joey. We are signing off. I hope you have a wonderful day, night, whatever it is, at whatever time you're listening. I hope it's been a good day. You stay classy.